Hello, dear friends. Uh, Today, the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization is underway, and there are discussions on peace and war in Ukraine and around it. I would like to offer you the solution of all these war troubles with the growing role of Cossacks. Cossacks could become a very interesting and uh, important factor in the global security and especially in the security of the United States and Ukraine plus Russia. How they will do it? They will do it in such a way. It's just my suggestion and plan, so to say, to discuss. Please call me, um, send me your opinions, and we'll work out the very good
Cossacks as
solution.
destructors of Putin's Russia. Recently, the Kremlin has been threatening the whole world with a nuclear war, either for Crimea, or for Donbass, or for the regions of the Russian Federation occupied by the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, there is a collapse of the generals of the RF armed forces by the new Minister of Defense, Lusov. Behind the special services behind him is the corrosion of the judicial structures. Willy-nilly, their functions were transferred to the Cossacks. Genetically, it is against revanchism of Czechism and the ex-Russian Federation. The question arises, will the Cossacks save the world from nuclear war by simply sweeping or fragmenting the Russian Federation into city-states? So, are the Cossacks a pillar or gravedigger of Putinism? The Hoover Institution has a lot of data on the Cossacks. It was a pillar of Tsarism, but also a mine under Stalinism. Now this phenomenon can become the gravedigger of Putin's neo-Stalinism. Those materials in the United States are useless without the support of digitalization. But in the Russian Federation, the Cossacks have put it in their service in dozens of websites. Back in February 2024, the decree of the President of the Russian Federation created Black Sea Cossack Army. It entered to the state register of Cossack societies of 142 societies for the autumn of this year. Willy-nilly, the Kremlin is expanding the potential of the Cossacks as the gravedigger of Putinism. Like, they will go to fight for it instead of nuclear weapons. And, possibly, instead of the conscripts drafted from October 1st to November 29th. Is it likely that mobilization for the Special Military Operation, SMO, instead of those green conscripts, there will be the Cossacks, including even the virtual one in the Zaporizhzhia region allegedly joined to the SMO zone? All Cossacks are registered, i.e. paid from the budget of the Russian Federation. In schools and universities of the Russian Federation, all programs for teaching the history and practice of the Cossacks in the one and indivisible Russian Federation are designed until 2030. Their essence is, the country needs fighters. Why do we need a Cossack if he is not fighting or is not ready to fight? The Kremlin probably decided to replace the mobilization of untrained soldiers. They need to master military skills for 2 months with the Cossacks to complete the SMO even before the US elections on November 5th. This is how cunningly and without a nuclear war, the Chekists and their colleagues from Harris's entourage plan to neutralize Trump 47 with his space forces against the enemies of all the United America. And according to the Monroe II Doctrine, the United America with pro-Trump states will rule in the Western Hemisphere, but not outside. Back in the 20th century, the colonies were liberated with non-nuclear weapons in their hands, received from the colonizers themselves and a little help from the USSR's friends. In the future Confederal ex-Russian Federation and, possibly, Ukraine, self-defense forces are already maturing. The Cossacks fit perfectly into the public security system there, both with a whip and a horse, and with ITAI. This trend is emerging against the escalation of the SMO and non-nuclear conflicts like Gaza October 7 into nuclear blackmail of the superpowers. The growing role of the Cossacks in 2024-25 is also associated with the growth of anti-Semitism after the events in Gaza on October 7, 2023 as the basis of anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism in the Islamic world and beyond. That is why the neutralization of anti-Semitism by the Cossacks of the same Israel will serve the peaceful dialogue of the global South and the global North. And the spread of Muslim English by Jewish Cossacks will hasten the emergence of Palestinian Israel. Few people know, except for experts from the Hoover Institution and the Jewish Lehaim magazine, that the first squadron, consisting entirely of Jewish Cossacks, was created in the Russian Empire in 1787. Prince Grigory Potemkin himself turned out to be a great adherent of Zionism, and he settled the Jews in Novorossiya. From 1772, after the partition of Poland, the Jews, like other Cossacks of the south of Russia, gave a lot for the development of the history and culture of other ethnic groups. It was not accidental, but quite natural, that Potemkin maintained a Jewish cavalry squadron on his estate as the basis of the Jewish Cossack Regiment or the Israeli Regiment. The Cossacks did not favor Jews during the Civil War. Many leaders of the Red Army were Jews. Nevertheless, the sons of the Novocherkassk Dr. Siegel were accepted into the White Cossacks for their merits in the battles with the Bolshevik government and awarded plots of land. Jewish Cossacks served in the headquarters of the Don White Army as commissioners of the generals. Since 2021, the Israeli armed forces have had a unit of Cossacks. It disperses radical Orthodox Jews with their claims to secular power. So, the Jewish Cossacks today suppress anti-Semitism better than the Orthodox Jews themselves. Then the teaching of Muslim English by the Jews of the Palestinians will establish peace more quickly than the mutual terror of these actors in solving the Palestinian-Israel problem. So, the Cossacks and Muslim English are two sides of the same coin for the security of the ex-Russian Federation with its Muslim areas inside and outside. After all, cybersecurity erases borders. For many, the theses about the self-determination of the ex-Russian Federation with the peaceful and bloodless emergence of a confederation of city-states look unusual. Yes, the centrist Putinists and their opponents, but also the centrist, sovereignists Kasparov, Khodorkovsky and Nevzlin, do not believe in a confederation of city-states like Khabarovsk with Fergant too. Let's consider the prospects for local and regional self-government without WMD, scares of nuclear war with the bloodbath from anti-Semitic Cossacks after the collapse of the dictatorship of the Chekists of the Russian Federation. Something may be useful for Ukraine and Belarus with their plans to create the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth III. The renewed Cossacks against the lumpen militariat from the SMO can also play a role in this. Leftovers of the Shoigus armed forces, Wagner PMC and Putin's foot soldiers from Chechnya have already been pretty much worn out and discredited by the media in 2022-2024. There will be such consequences as follows. Firstly, the services of Lukashenko and Erdogan at the BRICS-SCO summit on October 22-24 in Kazan will depreciate if the summit takes place. Secondly, the revival of the Zaporizhzhia Cossack army with the traditions of honor and valor is beneficial for Putin's successors, the Patrushev family. It is the leader of the feudocracy, and this is a counterbalance to the Petrocracy, which is under the protection of the Belousov's armed forces. So, the Cossacks are the support of new radicals like Sergei Fergal in the city-states of the Russian Federation, Ukraine and Belarus. This is theoretically the soft power of the Cossacks, equipped with ITAL in their hands, if any. There is a genetic memory of the Cossacks' self-defense of their lands in the past. Those mental structures based on cyber modernization are already being created in separate websites and Zoom conferences. Here are a number of theses for analyzing data from the GDP4, Claude, etc. platforms on how the Cossacks stand for peace and order in the coming virtual ex-Russian Federation. 1. History proves the vitality of the Cossacks under any political regimes because of their genetic love of freedom. 2. The Cossacks are loyal to any government for the sake of peace and order. That is why their traditional clothing stands out among the armed forces and police. By the way, Pashtuns have always stood out for their clothes and have never recognized military uniforms in principle. That is why in future city-states and in already existing closed societies such as the organized crime groups of the Kuban, Siberia and other regions, the Cossacks, even as a pillar of the kings and their thieves-in-law, are always in their traditional form. 3. Contrary to conjectures and primitivization, the Cossacks have never been either group compatriot, racist, or nationalist. Thus, 13 Slavic Cossacks in Russia and Ukraine coexisted with Cossacks from the ethnicities, tribes, half-breeds and quarter-tones of the Mongols, Turkic Tatars, Caucasians, Persians, Lithuanian Tatars Karaits of the Crimea and Polish Cossacks. 4. The Cossacks are not bound by one religion, although most of them belong to the Russian Orthodox Church and other branches of Orthodoxy in the United States, Argentina, Canada and Australia, for example, but among them there are serfdom, world believers, Islamists, shamanists and lamaists, supporters of Tao, and the latter are already supported by Chinese President Xi. 5. The social, or rather, genetic basis of the Cossacks is the peasants, mainly fugitives from the serfdom of tsars, kings, general secretaries and supposedly popularly elected communist presidents of the Russian Federation with their a priori illegal military service. In order not to become their weapon of war and violence against the population, the Cossacks have their own self-determination as angels of good. 6. Historians and philologists claim the origin of the Cossacks even before the nativity of Jesus Christ, and in the time of Genghis Khan, the Turkic Cossacks in the south of Russia were referred to as freelance horsemen in translation from local languages. 7. The multi-ethnic origin of the Cossacks makes them ideal defenders of city-states in the post-USSR/RF/CIS without fear of bloodbaths against non-believers, foreigners and, of course, Jews, who allegedly crucified Christ. The Tatar Turkic, Russian, Ukrainian and other ethnic origins of the Cossacks are the result of migration during the movement of the Golden Horde through the lands and mountains of present-day Eurasia and the Caucasus. Since then, the fortresses of the Cossacks have served as a historically legitimized basis for the self-defense of city-states in the ex-Russian Federation, mainly in the Caucasus. 8. The professionalism of the Cossacks has always been manifested, A. in the protection of transported goods, B. in the border protection of cities, and C. in the private security of the Shah of Iran Reza Pahlavi in 1918. 9. At the same time, the Cossacks always fled from serfdom, taxes, hunger and justice according to paper tiger laws and tried in their own courts criminals from among themselves. 10. Therefore, the Cossacks are an eternal source of disobedience to any sovereign power of the centrists with their clan rivalry, the Golden Horde with the Muscovites, the Crimea Tatar Jews with the imperial power of Russia, the white monarchists with the red imperialists. 11. The independence of the Cossacks used to serve the centrist sovereignists as a buffer on the borders against their imperialist neighbors. But in the 21st century, the Cossacks seem to become the mainstay of non-centrism. 12. The Cossacks have been and remain a reservoir of radicalism. The sovereign authorities keep the Cossacks away from their vulnerable nerve centers, and it isolates from the population by wars of attrition outside or on the borders of powers. 13. In the 20th century, the centrist sovereignists sold weapons to free Cossacks at half price, and for 25 and 18 years of service, They allocated land plots for personal farming. 14. That is why 60% of the Cossacks served the Tsar, and only 31% of the peasants. And in 1914-1920, the number of Cossacks in military operations for against the Tsar sharply decreased, including due to mass emigration. 15. But the real death for the traditional Brotherhood of Cossacks was the Soviet government. With the collapse of the Tsarist Empire, the 13 centers of the Cossacks could become the bond of the centrist monarchists in the war against the centrist Bolsheviks, but also for Confederates around Godfather Makhno. 16. In the USSR under Stalin and his war with Hitler, the Cossacks were physically destroyed by repressions and deliberate losses. When the Cossacks of General Davader went to Hitler's tanks with sabers. After the defeat of the Reich, captured Cossacks and Wehrmacht units were completely destroyed in the Gulag. 17. After the Second World War, the uniform and history of the Cossacks were banned. But the revival of the Cossacks proceeded at ever faster pace as the system of centrism of the USSR RFCIS deteriorated. From the folklore ensembles of the Cossacks of the 1970s, their self-organization by the 1990s became a pillar of the anti-communist reformation of power until 1992. And then there was a disintegration into loyal, disloyal and neutral associations of the Cossacks to the local authorities of the Russian Federation, CIS. 18. The Cossacks ceased to be monolithic during the initial multi-party system of the 1990s, and even more so when it was replaced by the hidden dictates of the special services in the 2000s and up to 2024. Cossack atamans, appointed from above, reflected political views allowed by the special services and eradicated by them as dissidents. 19. Despite the factionalism created by the special services, the Cossacks at their core still reflect the common hopes for self-government of the ex-Russian Federation, Ukraine and Belarus. Precisely because there is hopelessness from poverty and the existing absence of political leaders from the center are rapidly creating the basis for Yeltsin-style confederation structures with his motto, "Take as much sovereignty as you can swallow." 20. Centrist politicians turned the Cossacks into puppets under their control to intimidate the Confederate elites. But in doing so, this serves to select representatives of the Cossacks by those elites. They are called the leaders of regional organized crime groups for local structures of public or purely internal public security at city-states. 21. The traditions of the Cossacks of the past centuries are being revived more and more often without interaction. A. With the law enforcement agencies of the federals, replacing them with their own methods of law and order. B. Without providing assistance to federal border guards, taking away their initiative in territorial and other conflicts in the Russian Federation CISCSTO. C. In 1993, the Cossacks were integrated into the armed forces of the Russian Federation by decree of President Yeltsin on a voluntary basis, which created a reserve for the central place of the Cossacks in the confederations of the ex-Russian Federation. 22. The lack of control over the Cossacks gave rise to hot spots of contact with the local population in the ex-USSR. Religious differences were added to the ethnic problems between Russians and non-Russians, which only exacerbated the registered Cossacks who served for the money of the federal government. Ethno-religious conflicts between the Cossacks and the population of the ex-USSR have also turned into international conflicts in the CIS, up to the special military operation in Ukraine. There, the Kuban Cossacks and Chechens count on land and money from Moscow. 23. The exacerbation of ethno-religious feelings within the Cossacks leads to the arrogance of Russians against the Brotherhood of the Peoples of the USSR and the pretended Brotherhood of the Cossacks. This phenomenon of enmity between the brothers was the result of the strengthening of centrist petrocrats on the flow of petrodollars. Back in the USSR and during the two Chechen wars, The Petrocracy put the formerly free, mentally Cossacks at its service in the seizure of oil and gas regions and routes for transporting oil and gas within the ex-USSR. And many nuclear power plants in future city-states will clearly weaken the power of Petrocracy with its dictatorship on the military and society. 24. The CIS countries found themselves in the crosshairs of the armed centrist Muscovites, including the Cossacks, with the collapse of its former brotherhood from Kaliningrad to Sakhalin. So, in 2023, the Kremlin created 12 military brotherhoods plus 2 Cossack societies. There were 160,000 people in 2022 to fight the former Ukrainian brothers in the Donbass. 25. Muslims and Jews are always expelled from the ranks of the registered Cossacks as a fifth column, and the Slavic Cossacks themselves have long been dissatisfied with the foreign sovereignists in power. They say that they throw the Slavic Cossacks, for example, the Kuban fighters of 56,000, into armed conflicts without guarantees of protection for their families and awards for service. The obvious dissatisfaction of the registered Cossacks is voiced by the PROVOCATEUR herald allegedly from the military radicals Slavs Strelkov. He is already openly declaring the genocide of Russians in the SMO by the Kremlin's military political elite of only Jews. Like both Putin and Prigozhin, like his pseudo-critic, are both allegedly Jews. So, Oleg Gazmanov, who sings about the SL, confessed about the Belarusian father and the Jewish mother. We are waiting for 3 black swans for the growth of the influence of the Cossacks in the ex-Russian Federation and Ukraine. This is the sudden disappearance of Putin, Lukashenko and Biden, for health reasons. And then a new player will appear in the struggle of petrocrats for Donbass with its lithium for IT crazy and global digitalization. It seems to be the food autocracy with its future Cossacks of Zaporozhye, if any. A sharp turn from the squabble between petrocrats and digitalists, ITAI businesses, over the lithium of Donbass can be made by Putin's successor, Minister of Agriculture Patrushev Jr., while the master of soft power with its grain supplies to the global south, Dmitry Patrushev, will become the leader of the new grain food autocracy of the Russian Federation, Ukraine and other players in the SCOPRICS alliance, Iran and Venezuela plus African countries. The turn will give a qualitatively different property to the Cossack Brotherhood. Moreover, it will be strengthened not with petrodollars, but on Trump 47 bitcoins. Trump's cryptocurrency and bitcoins might help the Patrushev family increase profits from grain and sunflower oil exports. The peaceful confederates of the ex-Russian Federation and ex-Ukraine will quickly settle world problems without the nuclear Talmudism of the centrist sovereignists, and the Cossacks will help to do it without radiation all over the world. Cossacks.
Well, that's all, folks. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that all talks about nuclear disasters are bullshit, because nuclear weaponry is under very strict control from the space. And everybody knows it, except those who don't believe in AI or IT tools that prevent us from sudden attacks. So please send me your remarks, your proposals, and we'll go on working for the stable peace and cooperation between our countries. Now, bye-bye. See you soon.